My name is Claire, and the first words that cut into me like a blade were these, "How could you be so selfish?" My father's voice thundered across the living room of our family's lake house, each syllable echoing off the wooden walls. His face was crimson, his fists clenched at his sides. What was supposed to be a casual Sunday dinner had turned into a public trial, and I was the accused. I stood frozen, clutching a single sheet of paper in my hand, the property tax bill that had been slid across the coffee table toward me like a summons. I had walked into that house expecting warmth, maybe a quiet evening with my family. Instead, I was met with accusations, demands, and a chorus of disappointment. "You know your sister needs that money for her new business venture," my father continued, his eyes boring into mine. "You have more than enough. Why are you refusing now?" The air in the room was heavy, suffocating. My mother sat quietly on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed downward. She would not look at me. That silence hurt more than his shouting. And my younger sister, Megan. She lounged nearby, her arms crossed, the faintest smirk, tugging at her lips as though the drama was just entertainment. I tried to steady my voice, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Dad, I've been paying for everything for years. The property taxes, Megan's business trips, Mom's medical bills when insurance didn't cover them. I've done it without asking for anything in return. But I can't keep doing this forever." He waved my words away as if they were smoke. "We gave you everything growing up, and now when we finally need you, you abandon us, while your sister is trying to make something of herself." The unfairness in that moment cut deeper than any debt could. My entire body trembled, not just with anger, but with a clarity I hadn't felt before. I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about years of expectation, manipulation, and favoritism that had built up until I became their personal safety net. As he ranted, my eyes drifted across the table and landed on something half hidden beneath a magazine. An envelope. The corner of an official-looking document peeked out with words bold enough to make my stomach twist. "Trust Fund, Megan Walsh." I reached for it instinctively. My father's hand shot out too late. My fingers closed around the paper, and my world shifted in that instant. The pages trembled in my grasp, my breath catching as I scanned the words. $350,000, set aside, for Megan. Additional contributions planned for the future. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. My knees wavered as every buried memory clawed its way to the surface. When I begged for help with college tuition and was told there wasn't enough. When I worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load just to afford a security deposit. When my old Honda broke down and I walked in the snow to my shifts. Every single time the answer had been no. And yet here, written in legal ink, was proof that the money had always been there. Just not for me. I looked up at him. My father's face had changed, the red replaced with something else. Fear. "When were you going to tell me about this?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like glass. He tried to snatch the papers back, muttering, "You weren't supposed to see that." But it was too late. The truth had already pierced through the years of lies. I knew now beyond any doubt that my role in this family had never been as a daughter. I had been their financier, their safety net, their ATM, and something inside me shifted in that moment. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was the spark of something I had been missing all these years resolve. This confrontation would not end in that living room. This was just the beginning. Sup. My name is Claire, and I was 33 years old when that night at the lake house cracked everything open. To understand why my father's words burned so deeply, you need to know who I was before that argument. I was not born into privilege. I built my life piece by piece, while everyone else assumed I had it easy. When people picture a day trader, they often imagine someone born with connections, a safety net, or family money to cushion their failures. That was never my story. My story was coffee at midnight, bloodshot eyes staring at charts, years of trial and error, while debt collectors knocked at my door. My story was rejection letters from employers who never gave me a chance, and the quiet humiliation of knowing my parents had no intention of helping me get ahead. For 5 years, I clawed my way up. I studied market patterns until I could see them in my dreams. I made small trades, lost, learned, rebuilt, and repeated the cycle until the profits outweighed the mistakes. When my breakthrough finally came, it wasn't luck. It was the product of years of sacrifice that no one but me would ever fully grasp. And yet the irony was painful. The moment I started earning real money, my family turned to me with outstretched hands. At first, I didn't resent it. I told myself, this is my way of giving back. They raised me, and now I can ease their burdens. I convinced myself it was noble, even loving to cover their expenses. So I paid the property taxes on the lake house, $8,700 a year every year for 5 years. I covered Megan's car payments when she said she couldn't manage them, $43,500. I paid for the roof repair last summer, $12,000. I even handled Mom's surgery costs when insurance fell short, $8,200. Family vacations billed as gifts drained another $22,400. Every dollar I spent, I told myself was keeping the family together. But the truth, every dollar only chained me tighter to a role I never chose. And the saddest part, they never once said thank you. My father didn't beam with pride at my generosity. My mother didn't hug me in gratitude. Megan didn't whisper appreciation when her credit was saved. No, they treated it as if it was my duty, my responsibility, because I had more than enough. It took years before I could admit to myself that this wasn't giving. It was exploitation wrapped in the language of family. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been the one who gave everything only to realize no one noticed? Maybe it was money, maybe time, maybe your emotional energy. If you know that feeling, then you know the ache in my chest when my father called me selfish. Because selfish, that was the one thing I had never been. I built my career with no safety net. I funded their lifestyle when they didn't even ask politely. I bent over backwards to make sure no one else had to suffer the way I had suffered. And still, it was not enough. That night in the lake house, as my father's voice thundered and my mother's silence pressed down on me, I realized something chilling. They didn't see me as a daughter anymore. They saw me as a resource, an endless well they could draw from. And when I finally dared to set a boundary, they attacked me for it. Looking back, I think that was the moment I understood the truth. Love that is conditional on money isn't love at all. I should have seen it earlier, but sometimes you're too close to the fire to notice you're burning. And so with the trust fund document trembling in my hands, the story of my life came into sharp focus. My parents hadn't forgotten to help me. They hadn't struggled with money when I begged for support in college. They had chosen Megan, chosen to prioritize her future while leaving me to fend for myself. That realization didn't just hurt, it rewrote every chapter of my life in an instant. Before I move forward, I want to say this. If you've ever been told you are too strong to need help or too independent to deserve support, tell me in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from, and I want you to know you're not alone. And if you don't want to miss stories like mine, subscribe. This channel is a place where we uncover the truths that others bury. Because this isn't just my story, it's the story of anyone who has been punished for being capable, while others are rewarded for their dependence. And what came next after that discovery would shake my world even more. I remember sitting in my downtown apartment that night staring at the glowing numbers on my laptop screen. They weren't market trends or stock tickers this time. They were the brutal sums of what I had poured into my family over the past 5 years. Every cell in that spreadsheet felt like a wound I had inflicted on myself without realizing it. $43,500 in property taxes for the lake house. $43,500 in car payments for Megan. $12,000 for a roof repair, $8,200 for Mom's surgery, $22,400 for vacations, altogether $118,745. I whispered the number out loud, my voice breaking on the final syllable. $118,745. That was more than many people's entire life savings. It was more than I had ever dared to dream of making when I was in college, working 30 hours a week while taking a full course load. And I had handed it away silently, without contracts, without conditions, to people who never once stopped to thank me. Back then I told myself it was love. But the truth, it was fear. Fear that if I said no, I'd be cut out. Fear that my family's approval was tied to how much I was willing to sacrifice. Fear that if I refused, I would be labeled cold, ungrateful, or selfish. And yet, the cruel irony was that by giving everything I still earned those labels. My father still called me selfish. My sister still thought I was difficult. My mother still hid her eyes instead of defending me. That's when it hit me like a wave I had been financing not a family but a lie. I thought back to every time I picked up the bill at dinner while they smiled. Every time I got a text from Megan saying, "Thanks sis, you're the best," when she couldn't make her car payment. Every time Mom accepted another gift vacation without realizing it drained my account. They weren't moments of connection. They were withdrawals from a well I was never allowed to refill. And now that well was dry. I leaned back in my chair, my hands covering my face. Tears stung my eyes, but anger kept them from falling. I had worked too hard, lost too much sleep, and missed too many chances at happiness just to bankroll a family that never once stood in my corner. So I made a decision. The kind that doesn't come easily, the kind that changes everything. I would not give another dime, not one more penny. But before I took that leap, I wanted to know something only you can answer. If you were in my shoes, would you have kept paying, or would you have stopped? Be honest. Leave your thoughts in the comments because I need to know how others see this. It was strange, but saying those words out loud to you, to anyone who might listen, was freeing. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't heartless. I was someone who had been used. The next morning I opened my email. Waiting for me was another message from my father. Short, cold, the taxes are due. Do not let us down. Not a thank you. Not even a question. Just an order. And that was when something inside me broke for good. I replied with nothing. I closed the laptop. And I opened a new folder on my desktop called My Future. Inside I began saving files that weren't about markets or trades, but about me, my investments, my dreams, the life I wanted to build without being chained to their demands. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of freedom, small, fragile, but real. That night I slept without my phone buzzing in my ear, without the weight of their expectations pressing against my chest. And when I woke the next morning, I knew the fight had only just begun. The envelope was small, almost insignificant, tucked beneath a magazine on the coffee table. I might never have noticed it if my father hadn't been so distracted with his shouting. But the corner peeked out sharp and accusing as though it wanted me to see it. I reached for it before I could second-guess myself. His reaction was instant. "That's private," he barked, lunging forward. But my hands were quicker trembling as I pulled the document free. My eyes scanned the words and the world seemed to tilt beneath me. Trust Fund, Megan Walsh. The numbers swam on the page, my breath catching in my throat. $350,000, reserved, protected, guaranteed, and not for both daughters, only for one. For a moment, everything went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. My father's voice faded into the background, muffled like he was shouting underwater. My hands shook so violently, I thought I might rip the paper in half. I read the lines again slower this time, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. No, it was clear. A trust fund established years ago with provisions for future contributions. An inheritance for Megan's security. While I, the daughter who had worked through college, the one who had begged for tuition help, the one who had been told we don't have enough, was never even considered. Memories flashed like lightning strikes. Megan getting a shiny new car on her 16th birthday, while I scraped tips from my part-time job to buy a rusted Honda. Megan attending a private university with family support while I juggled scholarships, shifts at the coffee shop, and endless exhaustion. Megan's dance lessons, her business trips, her endless opportunities, while I was told to be grateful for what you have. And now the final insult. While I drained $118,745 into their needs, my parents had secretly been building a fortune for Megan. I looked up from the paper. My father's face had lost some of its color. He snatched at the document, shoving it back into the envelope with a muttered, "You weren't supposed to see that." Clearly, I whispered, my voice hollow. My eyes burned, but no tears came. "That explains everything. Why you never helped with my student loans. Why you told me money was too tight. why every burden fell on me while Megan floated. My mother finally spoke, her voice soft, almost pleading. Sweetheart, your sister needs more help than you. You've always been so independent, so capable. We're proud of you for how well you've done. The twisted logic took my breath away. Proud that I had survived their neglect. Proud that they had turned me into a workhorse so Megan could live carefree. I stared at her, my heart breaking, because in that moment, I realized she truly believed it. I had been punished for succeeding. Megan had been rewarded for needing. I folded my arms tightly across my chest, trying to keep myself from falling apart. All those times I said slowly, my voice shaking, when I begged for help with rent, when my car broke down, when I was barely sleeping during college. You told me you couldn't help, but the money was there. It was just earmarked for Megan. My father shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Investment decisions aren't that simple, Claire. We had to think about the future. Not my future, I shot back. The room went dead quiet. My mother pressed her lips together, her gaze locked on the floor. My father crossed his arms, his face red again, but now the anger was laced with something else, guilt. And in that silence, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't imagining things all these years. I wasn't paranoid or ungrateful or selfish. I was right. The favoritism was real. The betrayal was real. And the daughter they thought would always comply, always pay, always stay silent, she had just woken up. I sat there, the trust fund amount burned into my memory, and felt something strange power. For the first time, the truth wasn't theirs to control. It was mine. The trust fund document didn't just reveal numbers. It ripped open a vault of memories I had buried deep. As I sat there, the pages trembling in my hands, I realized this favoritism wasn't new. It had been there all along, subtle at first, then blatant, and finally undeniable. I remembered being 12, begging to join a summer art camp. Too expensive, my father had said without hesitation. 2 weeks later, Megan was enrolled in private dance lessons that cost double the camp fee. She twirled across polished floors while I sketched in a notebook, bought from the clearance bin. At 16, the gap widened. I had saved every penny from babysitting, lawn mowing, and stocking shelves at the grocery store, dreaming of buying my first car. But when Megan turned 16, the driveway lit up with the flash of headlights as my parents unveiled her brand new car, complete with a ribbon on top. I smiled in the photos, but later that night I cried into my pillow, wondering why my hard work was invisible. When it came time for college, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Megan was accepted into a private university tuition, covered with family support. Meanwhile, I was told, "We wish we could help, but things are tight." I cobbled together scholarships and student loans, working 30 hours a week at a coffee shop. I pulled all-nighters not for exams, but to cover rent. Still, I convinced myself it wasn't favoritism. Maybe the timing was bad. Maybe the money really wasn't there. But now I knew. The money had been there. It had always been there. Just not for me. The memories piled higher. Megan's birthday parties with hired entertainers, while mine were simpler because you're more mature. Megan's business venture fully funded while I was told risk-taking was reckless. Megan being rescued from every mistake while I was praised for figuring things out on my own. At the time, I thought independence was a badge of honor, but in truth, it was a sentence. I was raised to believe that asking for help made me weak, while Megan was encouraged to lean on everyone around her. The twisted logic burned in my chest. My parents had engineered this imbalance, then disguised it as pride. My success was their excuse to abandon me. My resilience was the reason they gave nothing back. I glanced at Megan that night. She sat calmly scrolling on her phone, barely listening. Of course she wasn't surprised by the trust fund. She had always lived with the quiet assurance that everything would be handled for her. She never had to worry about bills, loans, or scraping by. And for years, I had carried the weight so she wouldn't have to. I looked back at my mother. She finally raised her eyes to meet mine. There was no malice there, only resignation. As if this hierarchy had been so deeply ingrained that she couldn't imagine life any other way. Her silence felt like betrayal. And my father. His jaw was clenched, his posture stiff. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften. He just stood there daring me to challenge his authority. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. That night driving home through the snow-capped mountains, I thought of every no I had ever received. No to the camp, no to the car, no to tuition, no to rent. The word had been a wall I slammed into over and over again, bruising myself while Megan strolled through open doors. And now, holding proof of the trust fund, I finally understood. The wall had never been built from scarcity. It had been built from choice. That realization was devastating, but it was also liberating. Because if my family could choose to neglect me, then I could choose too. Choose to stop paying. Choose to stop begging for scraps of love disguised as obligation. Choose to step out of the role they had written for me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my jaw set. For the first time, I felt the power shift. And this time, the choice would be mine. My mother's voice was soft when it finally broke the silence. Sweetheart, you've always been so capable. So independent. Your sister, she needs more help than you. That's why we did what we did. We're proud of you. Those words landed harder than my father's shouting. Proud. Proud that I had clawed my way through life with no support. Proud that when I collapsed from exhaustion during finals week in college, no one came to help me up. Proud that I had carried the financial weight of their lives for 5 years without complaint. Proud that while Megan leaned on them, I was left to stand alone. It was like being praised for surviving a storm they had thrown me into. For years I told myself their choices weren't personal, that maybe money really was tight when I needed it most. That maybe Megan's needs just happened to come first, by circumstance, not preference. I spun excuses to soothe myself to avoid seeing the truth that was right in front of me. But hearing my mother frame my suffering as proof of my strength, that shattered something inside me. I thought of those long nights in college, sitting under fluorescent lights at the coffee shop, wiping down counters, while my textbooks sat untouched in the corner. I remembered the ache in my back, the fog in my mind, and the pit in my stomach when I realized I couldn't afford rent. I remembered begging them for a small loan, just a few $100s to keep a roof over my head. My father's voice had been firm. We can't help Claire. You'll figure it out. And I did. I always did. But Megan, when her car payment bounced, I was the one who covered it. When she wanted a business trip funded, Dad handed her a credit card. When she decided to start a new venture, they created a trust fund. And now the explanation was simple. I was too independent, too strong, too capable. My success had become their excuse to neglect me while Megan's dependence became her reward. The twisted logic burned through me. Success should be celebrated, not punished. Independence should inspire respect, not abandonment. But in my family, it had turned me into their scapegoat, the one who could be ignored because she'll be fine. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I drove home that night. The snow fell heavier, the headlights carving tunnels of light through the darkness. The mountains loomed silent witnesses to my revelation. I pulled into my apartment garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the stillness. My phone buzzed with another text from Megan. Dad says you're being difficult about the taxes. Don't be selfish, Claire. Selfish. There it was again. The word they loved to throw at me. The word that erased years of sacrifice. The word that turned my silence into obligation. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the empty car. Selfish, I had given more than $118,000 to this family. I had drained my savings, my time, my energy. And now, because I wanted to stop, because I wanted something left for myself, I was selfish. I realized then that my family had built an entire narrative around me. Claire the strong one, Claire the independent one, Claire the one who doesn't need help, Claire the one who can always be counted on. It wasn't admiration, it was exploitation disguised as pride. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial records again. This time, I didn't look at them as evidence of generosity. I looked at them as proof of manipulation. Every payment, every receipt, every transfer was a reminder of how thoroughly I had been used. My mother's words echoed in my head. We're proud of you. But pride without love is meaningless. Pride without fairness is cruel. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen lighting my face, and whispered into the quiet apartment. I am done being punished for my success. The decision was forming in me, solidifying with every breath. I had been their safety net for too long. It was time to cut the ropes. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of resolve buzzing in my veins. It wasn't anger anymore, it was focus. Cold, sharp, unshakable focus. For years, I had told myself my sacrifices were love, that keeping meticulous records of every dollar I spent on my family was just a way to stay organized. But now, staring at the mountain of betrayal in my memories, I realized those records weren't just spreadsheets. They were ammunition. I pulled my laptop onto the kitchen table and opened the folder labeled Family Contributions. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment. It was strange how something I had treated casually, just a habit of documenting expenses, was about to become the most powerful tool I owned. The spreadsheet stretched across the screen like a timeline of my own naivety. Year after year, line after line. Property taxes on the lake house, $8,700 annually for 5 straight years. Megan's car payments, $43,500. The new roof, $12,000. Mom's surgery, $8,200. Family vacations listed neatly as gifts, $22,400. I scrolled and scrolled until the total stared back at me. $118,745. My chest tightened. The number wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was the cost of every sleepless night, every shift I worked when I should have been studying, every opportunity I had sacrificed so that my family could live comfortably. But now the spreadsheet wasn't a record of generosity, it was a ledger of betrayal. I spent the next few hours pulling digital copies of checks, transfer receipts, and even old text messages, where they had thanked me in vague, dismissive ways. "Thanks, sis, you're a lifesaver. Couldn't have done it without you." Words that felt hollow, now empty acknowledgments that had never matched the weight of what I gave. By midday, I had compiled a binder of evidence organized, color-coded, undeniable. My day trading background had trained me to track details with precision, and now that skill was finally being used for myself. I didn't stop there. I called Joseph Klein, the financial advisor who had helped me grow my portfolio. He was one of the few people I trusted in this world. "Joseph," I said, my voice steady, but laced with steel, "I need you to look at something for me, and I need your honest opinion." Within an hour, I was sitting across from him in his office. He adjusted his glasses as he flipped through the binder, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. Finally, he looked up. "Claire, this is substantial. You've basically been the financial backbone of your entire family. And you never asked for repayment." "Their family," I murmured. The word tasted bitter now. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Listen to me. Your generosity is admirable, but this isn't healthy. You're hindering your own future while enabling their dependence. And now with this trust fund revelation, they've not only taken advantage of you, they've deceived you." His words settled like stones in my stomach. Deceived. That was exactly what it was. For the next 2 hours, Joseph helped me map out a plan. He recommended a forensic accountant, Victor Hernandez, who specialized in family financial disputes. If nothing else, Joseph said, you'll have a documented record, something you can use as leverage. Or, if it comes to it, something you can use in court. Court. The word sounded foreign, almost absurd. But as I thought of my father's face when I held the trust fund papers, I realized this could get ugly, very ugly. When I left Joseph's office, the binder felt heavier in my arms, but my steps were lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to their demands. I was preparing. That night, I placed the binder on my desk and stared at it for a long time. It was more than paper and numbers, it was my story. The proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the imbalance, that my sacrifices had been real and measurable. I whispered into the quiet. If they want to treat me like a bank, then it's time for an audit. And with that, the game changed. I sat in Victor Hernandez's office a week later, my binder of evidence spread across his polished wooden desk. Victor was calm, meticulous, the kind of man who could stare at a pile of chaos and find order in it. He flipped through each document carefully, his pen moving in neat strokes as he took notes. "You keep exceptionally detailed records," he remarked, his dark eyes narrowing as he scanned one of the spreadsheets. "Most people don't track this level of information." I gave a small shrug. It started as a habit from day trading. Every number matters there. I guess I carried it into my personal life too. He tapped the final page and leaned back in his chair. "That habit may be the only reason you'll get closure now. Do you want to know the total damage?" My breath caught. I had calculated before, but hearing it from someone else would make it real. I nodded. Victor slid a document across the desk. The numbers glared up at me in black ink, $118,745. But that wasn't the end. His pen circled another figure. "This additional $14,915 is the estimated interest you lost by diverting these funds from your investments. Based on your portfolio's performance, that's a conservative estimate." I blinked at the page. The room seemed to sway. $118,745 money I had willingly given away, plus nearly $15,000 in lost growth, altogether over $133,000 gone from my future. It wasn't just numbers. It was years of my life. It was the down payment on a house. It was a retirement account that could have secured my later years. It was financial independence traded for chains. A bitter laugh escaped me. I gave up my future. For what? So my father could scream at me. So my sister could drive around in a new car while I worked 2 jobs in college. Victor's voice was even almost gentle. "You gave because you thought it was love. But love without reciprocity becomes exploitation. This isn't sustainable, Claire, and now you have proof." Proof. The word rang in my ears. I stared at the notarized calculations, the signatures, the official seals. For so long, my family had convinced me I was exaggerating, that I was ungrateful, that I was selfish for even questioning the arrangement. But now the truth was on paper. Cold, objective, undeniable. As Victor packed the documents into a neat folder, he asked, "Do you want to pursue legal restitution? It's possible, though family cases can be complicated without contracts." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet. For now, I just want to be prepared. If they push me, I want them to see exactly what I've done for them, and what happens when I stop." His eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. "Then this folder is your shield. Use it wisely." I left his office with the documents clutched to my chest. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the early evening sky. For the first time in years, I felt taller, as though I had been hunched under invisible weight and was finally standing straight. That night back in my apartment, I spread the papers across my dining table. Each page was a battle scar. Property tax receipts lined up next to Megan's car payment confirmations. Vacation invoices rested beside my mother's medical expenses. Together, they painted a picture of someone who had carried an entire family while being told she wasn't enough. My phone buzzed beside me, a text from Dad. "Haven't received the tax payment yet. Due date is approaching." Another buzz, this time from Megan. "Dad says you're being difficult about money. Don't be selfish." The audacity almost made me laugh. After everything, after the discovery of the trust fund, after the years of silence and sacrifice, they still saw me as nothing but a wallet. I silenced my phone and turned back to the documents. They weren't just proof. They were liberation. For the first time in my life, I had evidence that the story I told myself, that I was loved, that I was valued, was a lie. And with that evidence, I could finally write a new story. The story of someone who refused to be used. The morning after Victor handed me the final documents, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. For so long, my first thought each day had been about someone else. Was Megan's car payment due? Did the property tax deadline creep closer? Did Mom need another bill covered? But that morning, my first thought was about me. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window of my downtown apartment. The city was alive, horns, blaring, people rushing to work, but I felt a strange stillness. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for the next family demand. I opened my laptop and pulled up all the accounts I had linked to them, and then one by one I severed the ties. First, I canceled the automatic payment for Megan's car. My finger hovered for a moment over the confirm button, but then I clicked. Done. Next, I removed myself as an authorized payer on every shared account. Utilities, homeowner association fees, even small subscriptions I had covered without thinking. Each removal felt like snapping a chain that had bound me for years. Finally, I transferred $120,000 from my brokerage account into a brand new fund labeled My Future. Seeing those words typed into the system brought tears to my eyes. My future, not theirs, not Megan's, mine. When I closed my laptop, I leaned back and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The silence of my apartment was no longer suffocating, it was peaceful. Of course, the peace didn't last long. By noon, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Megan called 7 times in a row before sending a string of texts. What the hell, Claire? The bank says my car payment was declined. Are you trying to ruin my credit? Dad is furious. Fix this now. Minutes later, another text from Dad called me immediately. This is unacceptable. You cannot abandon your responsibilities to this family. Responsibilities. That word almost made me laugh. They had redefined my love as duty, my generosity as obligation. But now I was rewriting the definition. I ignored every call, every text. I focused instead on my trading day. The markets were volatile, demanding my full attention. For once, I poured my energy into something that would benefit me, not them. That evening, I listened to a voicemail from Mom. Her voice cracked. Claire, please. Your father is beside himself. The tax notice came with a late fee warning. Megan can't make her car payment. We don't understand why you're doing this. Whatever has upset you, we can talk about it. Please, call us back. No mention of the trust fund. No acknowledgement of the $118,000 I had already given. No gratitude. Just desperation for me to resume the status quo. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone against my chest. Their silence on the trust fund said everything. They didn't want to face it. They wanted to pretend it didn't exist. But I knew better now, and I was done pretending. That night, as I looked around my apartment, I realized how different the air felt. For the first time, my money was mine. My decisions were mine. My future was mine. I had no illusions that this would end quietly. My father's temper was legendary, and Megan's entitlement had no limits. They would fight. They would push. They would try to manipulate. But I was ready. And here's the thing, you won't believe what happened when I finally stood in front of my entire extended family and revealed the truth. That moment didn't just change me, it changed everything. So stay with me, because the storm that followed was louder, harsher, and more shocking than anything I had faced before. And I'll tell you exactly how it unfolded. The fallout came faster than I expected. By lunchtime the next day, my phone was a battlefield. Notifications flooded in texts, voicemails, missed calls, each one sharper, angrier than the last. Megan's voice crackled through one voicemail, high-pitched and frantic. Claire, are you out of your mind? The bank bounced my car payment. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? I have plans this weekend, and you're ruining everything. Another message, this time my father, his voice tight with rage. You call me right now. This is unacceptable behavior. You cannot abandon this family. We have obligations. You are part of those obligations. Obligations. That word again. I sat in silence listening as their anger played out like a broken record. Over and over they demanded, they accused, they ordered. Not once did anyone say thank you for the years I had sacrificed. Not once did they acknowledge the trust fund. I set the phone down on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady, my heartbeat calm. That surprised me, because only a month ago, a single angry text from my father would have sent me spiraling into panic. But now I felt something new, control. By mid-afternoon, the situation escalated. Building security buzzed my apartment intercom. Ms. Walsh, the guard, said, his voice uneasy. Your father is here. He's demanding to see you. I froze the glass of water halfway to my lips. Tell him I'm not available. He insists he won't leave. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, then called the police. If he refuses, treat him like any other trespasser. 20 minutes later, a text popped up from my cousin Thomas. Just saw Uncle Greg being escorted out of your building by security. You okay? I stared at the screen, my chest tight, before replying, I'm fine. Family financial disagreement. His response came quickly. About time you stood up to them. The way they've treated you versus Megan has been wrong for years. I blinked at those words. For so long I had convinced myself no one else noticed, that the favoritism was invisible outside our home. But Thomas saw, maybe others did too, and that realization gave me strength. That evening my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole and saw Megan, arms crossed, foot tapping, entitlement radiating off her like heat from asphalt. I opened the door but kept the chain latch fastened. "What do you want?" She scoffed. "What do I want? I want you to stop acting like a psycho." "Dad says you're refusing to pay the taxes." "My car payment bounced. You're destroying everything." "Correct," I said evenly. "I canceled them all." Her eyes flashed. "Why, what is your problem?" "The problem," I said, my voice low and steady, "is that I've contributed almost $118,000 to this family over the past 5 years. And Dad has been secretly funding a trust for you. $350,000. While I carried everything you were being handed security." Her mouth fell open. For the first time she looked shaken, but it lasted only seconds before her expression hardened. "That's different. The trust is for my future. You've always had yours handled. You don't need it the way I do." I let out a bitter laugh. "And that's exactly the problem. You believe that because that's what they've fed you your whole life. That my independence means I deserve nothing, while your dependence entitles you to everything." Megan's face twisted. "You're unbelievable. You would let Mom and Dad lose the lake house. You'd just walk away from our family." "They're the ones who walked away from me," I replied, my hand tightening on the chain latch. "And they still have options. They can use some of your trust fund." Her eyes widened, then narrowed again. "That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "Nothing about this has ever been fair." And with that I shut the door in her face. As the lock clicked, I leaned against the door, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from release. Years of silence and compliance had ended in one conversation, and I wasn't going back. "Now I want to ask you something. If your sibling came to your door like that, demanding you keep paying while they sat on a secret fortune, what would you have said? Would you have given in? Or would you have closed the door like I did?" Tell me in the comments, because I wonder if anyone else has faced a choice like this. I walked back to the kitchen, silence settling in my apartment again. But this time the silence wasn't lonely, it was powerful. And I knew the storm wasn't over yet. The worst was still coming. Wait. 3 days later, my inbox lit up with a message that made me laugh out loud, bitter and disbelieving. It wasn't from my parents or Megan this time. It was from my Uncle Pete, my father's older brother. "Claire, what's going on with Greg and the lake house? He came to me asking for a $10,000 loan to cover property taxes and penalties. He said you refused to help the family. That doesn't sound like you." I read the words again, shaking my head. Of course. Rather than dip into Megan's trust fund, rather than even acknowledge the mountain of money I had already poured into their lives, my father was going to other relatives, painting himself as the martyr and me as the selfish villain. For a moment, anger bubbled hot in my chest. But then a strange calm settled over me. Because this time I wasn't powerless. This time I had proof. I carefully composed my reply. No anger, no accusations, just the facts. I attached a PDF summary from the forensic accountant, every property tax payment, every car payment, every vacation, every medical bill. $118,745 in total, plus the lost interest. And then I added a short note. "Uncle Pete, I love this family, but the truth is I've already contributed nearly $120,000 over the past 5 years, while my parents secretly built a $350,000 trust fund for Megan. I can't keep paying. I hope you understand." His response came within an hour. "Holy hell, Claire, I had no idea. None of us did. Greg's been telling everyone he's struggling to support both of you equally. This changes everything." My hands trembled as I set the phone down. For so long I had carried the burden in silence, convinced that no one else would believe me, that my father's narrative was too strong to fight. But now, with the truth laid bare, the tide was shifting. The very next day my cousin Thomas called. His voice was urgent. "Claire, you need to know something. Dad told me there's a family meeting this weekend at your parents' house. Your father called it. He's planning to rally everyone against you, make it look like you're abandoning the family." And worse, he's going to guilt you into paying not just the taxes, but all the late fees and penalties too. My stomach nodded. A family meeting. My father was preparing his stage, lining up relatives like jurors to condemn me. "Are you going?" I asked. "Yes," Thomas said firmly, "and so are you. You need to set the record straight. Bring your documents. I'll back you up." After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the binder of records on my desk. My heart pounded at the thought of walking into that room, facing the glares, the accusations, the endless manipulation. But then I remembered Uncle Pete's shocked email. I remembered Thomas's support. Maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally be louder than my father's voice. Saturday came too quickly. I dressed carefully that morning in my black pantsuit, the one I wore for tough negotiations at work. I wanted them to see me not as the obedient daughter, but as a woman who knew her worth. I slid the binder into my briefcase, zipped it shut, and drove to my parents' house. The living room was packed when I walked in. Aunts, uncles, cousins' faces turned toward me with a mix of confusion and expectation. My father stood near the fireplace, clearly mid-speech, his tone commanding. "And Claire refuses to contribute," he was saying, leaving us to scramble for solutions. "We have always supported both daughters equally, but now, I'm sure you were just about to provide all the relevant financial information." I interrupted, my voice steady, as I set my briefcase on the coffee table. The room fell silent. My father's face hardened, his jaw tight. "We're discussing your refusal to meet family obligations." "Interesting," I said, snapping open the briefcase. "Because I have 5 years of records showing the family obligations I already met, totaling nearly $120,000. Obligations that apparently didn't exist when I needed help with tuition, housing, or a car. Obligations that somehow existed only for me, never for Megan." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Aunt Catherine frowned. "What trust fund?" I looked at my father, his lips pressed into a thin line. When he said nothing, I pulled copies of the summary document from my case and handed them around the room. "For the past 5 years, I paid the property taxes on the lake house, Megan's car payments, family vacations, medical bills. Meanwhile, my parents built a $350,000 trust fund exclusively for Megan." Gasps filled the air. My father's face flushed crimson. "These are private family matters," he thundered. "Exactly," Uncle Pete said, his voice sharp. "Family matters. And in this family, we should treat our children equally." I hadn't expected him to speak up. I hadn't expected the others to look at me with shock, anger, even sympathy. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes. The truth was finally out. The room erupted the moment my relatives finished reading the papers I had handed out. Voices overlapped, shock and disbelief filling the air like a storm breaking loose. My aunts leaned over the documents, muttering to one another. My cousins whispered with wide eyes. Uncle Pete looked at me, then at my father, his expression carved with anger. I stayed seated, my binder still open in front of me, my palms pressed flat on the table to steady myself. Inside, my heart was pounding, but I refused to let them see it. "This is ridiculous," my father barked, his face red, his fists clenched at his sides. "These numbers are taken out of context. She's twisting the story to make herself look like the victim." "Context," I said quietly, my voice steady, but carrying through the room. "The context is 5 years of me paying nearly $120,000. The context is a $350,000 trust fund, hidden for Megan while I was told we had nothing. The context is sacrifice and betrayal." Gasps spread again. Aunt Catherine leaned forward, glaring at my father. "Is it true, Greg? Did you set up a trust for Megan and not for Claire?" He stammered, words tangling in his mouth. It's complicated. Megan needed more support. Claire has always been independent." There it was again. Independent. The excuse they wielded like a weapon. Uncle Pete slammed a hand against the armrest of his chair. Independent doesn't mean invisible. Independent doesn't mean you use one child as a bank while protecting the other with a trust fund. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "We just thought Claire could handle herself. She always has." I turned to her, my chest tightening. Mom handling myself never meant I didn't need help. It meant I learned not to ask, because every time I did, I was denied. And now I see why. The money was never gone. It was just never for me. The room quieted, the weight of my words settling on everyone. Megan sat frozen on the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. For once, she wasn't smirking. She wasn't rolling her eyes. She was pale, her gaze darting between me and the floor. "This is family business," my father tried again, his voice sharp. "It doesn't concern anyone outside this immediate circle." "It concerns all of us," Aunt Catherine snapped. "Because you've been telling everyone you're struggling to support both daughters equally. And you let Claire carry the weight while lying to the rest of us." The room fractured, then voices rising, sides being chosen. Some relatives demanded explanations, others looked at me with newfound respect, and a few, mostly Dad's closest allies, muttered about loyalty and obedience. But the tide was shifting. I could see it in the eyes of those who had always believed my father's stories. The myth was crumbling. My father glared at me, his jaw tight, but beneath the fury I saw something I had never seen in him before: fear. And behind that fear was something almost stranger: respect. The meeting dragged on, voices clashing, until finally my father stormed out, my mother trailing behind him with tears in her eyes. Megan stayed seated, silent, avoiding eye contact with everyone. As the relatives dispersed, some came to me quietly, their voices low but firm. "We had no idea. You were right to show us. It's time someone held him accountable." When the last of them left, I gathered my papers back into the binder. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but with release. For the first time, I had spoken the truth aloud, and people had listened. Driving home that evening, the sky was streaked with the last light of sunset. For years, I had carried the burden in silence. Now the silence was broken, and there was no going back. But little did I know that confrontation in my parents' living room was only the beginning. What came next would be even more shocking, because it wasn't my father who forced the next change. It was Megan. Stay with me, because the twist you're about to hear was the one I never expected, and it changed everything. Psyched. When I left my parents' house that night, I could still feel the echoes of the meeting vibrating through me. For the first time in my life, the narrative had shifted. My father had always been the dominant voice, the storyteller who painted me as cold, ungrateful, and difficult. But now the truth was in everyone's hands, black and white on paper, undeniable, undeniable. The following morning, my phone lit up with messages. Not from my father, not from Megan, but from relatives who had been at that meeting. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You've been carrying them all this time. That's not right. Thank you for showing us. It took courage." Each message felt like a small crack in the walls that had isolated me for so long. I wasn't alone anymore. For years, I thought no one noticed the favoritism. I thought everyone believed my father's version of the story. But now people were stepping out of the shadows, acknowledging the truth I had carried in silence. Meanwhile, my father's grip on the family began to slip. He had always thrived on control, commanding respect with his booming voice, his presence, his carefully crafted stories. But the fear in his eyes during that meeting haunted me. It was the look of a man who realized the mask was slipping, that his authority wasn't absolute anymore. And strangely, seeing that fear gave me strength. 'Cause for the first time, I wasn't the one afraid. The ripple effect spread quickly. My cousin Thomas called that afternoon. "Claire, I've been thinking about what you showed us. Dad's furious with Uncle Greg. He said it's about time someone stood up to him. You should know the family's talking, and most of them are on your side now." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The thought was almost foreign. On my side. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the one who exposed the truth. But with that validation came a new kind of pressure. My father didn't back down easily. If anything, he would fight harder to regain control. And I knew deep down that another confrontation was inevitable. Still, the fear that had defined so much of my life was gone. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I wasn't the invisible sibling. I was the woman who dared to break the silence. That night, I sat at my desk, the binder of evidence beside me, and opened my trading platform. The numbers on the screen danced like they always did, but for once, I wasn't trading to fund anyone else's dreams. I was trading for me, my money, my choices, my future. And it felt incredible. Before I continue, I want to pause and ask you, have you ever had to stand up to someone powerful in your family? Someone who thought they controlled the narrative until you finally spoke the truth. If you have, tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because stories like this are about more than money. They're about reclaiming power, about refusing to let silence define us. The next few days brought a strange calm. My father's texts grew shorter, more clipped. Taxes are due. Call me. Unacceptable. But the fire in them was dimmer now. The authority wasn't there. He knew the family had seen behind the curtain. And then came the shock I never expected. Not from my father, not from my mother, but from Megan. Late one evening, my phone rang. I hesitated, staring at her name flashing on the screen. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Claire. I saw the documents, all of them. Is it really that much, over 118,000? Yes, I said simply. Every penny documented. There was a long silence. Then for the first time in my life, Megan's voice cracked. I had no idea. Dad always told me you helped a little here and there because you had extra money. He never said you were covering everything. While he was building the trust for me, I closed my eyes, my throat tight. Now you know. And that's when Megan said the words I never thought I'd hear. I'm going to fix this. I sat there stunned, the phone pressed to my ear as my sister, the one who had benefited from my silence all these years, finally broke hers. When Megan hung up that night, I didn't believe her. For 31 years, she had been the golden child, shielded from consequences, rewarded for her dependency. Why would she suddenly grow a conscience now? But the very next morning, an envelope arrived from my father's attorney. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a formal document stating the property taxes on the lake house had been paid in full. Attached was a legally binding amendment. Ownership of the lake house was now divided, with 25% transferred into my name. I read the words over and over, unable to process them at first. My parents would never have given me ownership willingly, which meant only one thing: Megan had intervened. My phone buzzed a moment later. It was a text from her. I used the trust. You deserve a share, and Dad needed to see what fairness looks like. I sank into my chair, my heart hammering. For years, I had dreamed of acknowledgement, of someone in my family recognizing my sacrifices. I never thought it would be Megan. Later that evening, she called again. Her voice was steadier this time, though tinged with something fragile. Claire, I can't undo everything, but I can do this. I've asked Dad to split the trust fund equally between us. I gasped. You what? I told him it wasn't right, she said quickly, that I never questioned why I got everything and you got nothing. Uncle Pete and Aunt Catherine backed me up. Dad fought it, of course, but he's meeting with his financial advisor tomorrow. I don't know if he'll follow through, but I pushed him harder than I ever have. For the first time in decades, I was silent, not because I was ignored, but because I didn't know what to say. Megan, I whispered, finally, thank you. No, she replied, her voice catching. Thank you for finally making me see, for forcing all of us to face the truth. I thought about her words long after the call ended. Megan wasn't absolved. She had benefited from years of favoritism, and she knew it. But in that moment, she wasn't the entitled sister anymore. She was just a woman confronting the weight of privilege she hadn't earned. Days later, I received the confirmation the trust fund was being amended. Half for Megan, half for me. My father's message was predictably dismissive. This wasn't necessary. Family helps, family. But my mother's text, quiet and tender, meant more. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I should have done the same years ago. I sat on my balcony that night, the city lights shimmering below me. For years I had felt like an outsider in my own family, a workhorse disguised as a daughter. Now for the first time I felt like my place had shifted. Not because of money, but because of acknowledgement. The transfer of ownership, the split trust fund, they weren't just financial changes. They were symbols. Proof that I wasn't invisible. Proof that I had value beyond my independence. As I closed my eyes, I thought back to that first confrontation at the lake house. My father's furious face, my mother's silence, Megan's smirk. I remembered the humiliation, the anger, the heartbreak. And then I thought of the binder in my desk drawer, the shield I had built with my own hands. That shield had forced the truth into the light, and the truth had forced change. But the biggest shift wasn't in them, it was in me. For the first time, I no longer felt like the child begging for scraps of love. I was the woman who had claimed her worth, and no one could take it back. The official papers arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the sound of the storm outside water sliding down the window pane as I tore open the thick envelope. Inside was the confirmation the trust fund had been amended. Half for Megan, half for me. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the document. $350,000 had once been locked away for my sister alone. Now, because I had found the courage to speak, to resist, to expose the truth that fortune was divided equally. For the first time, fairness had entered the equation. It wasn't the money itself that made my chest tighten with emotion. It was the validation. For years, I had been told I didn't need help, that my independence meant I should expect nothing. That narrative had shaped my entire life until now. Seeing my name on that document was proof that I wasn't invisible anymore. When Megan called later that evening, her voice was calmer than I'd ever heard it. Dad wasn't happy, of course. He fought it until the very last second. But Uncle Pete and Aunt Catherine refused to back down, and I wouldn't either. He finally agreed. I swallowed hard. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she replied firmly. I benefited from the favoritism. I let myself believe I deserved it. But you made me see the truth. You carried us while I coasted. This was the least I could do. For the first time in our lives, we were speaking as equals. Not as the favored child and the forgotten one, but as two sisters trying to rebuild something honest. That night, my mother sent me one final message. Your father may never admit it, but I want you to know I see you now. I should have spoken up years ago. I'm sorry. I didn't know if her words could undo decades of silence, but they mattered. They mattered because for once she acknowledged my pain. As I lay in bed listening to the rain, I thought back over everything, the years of sacrifice, the discovery of the trust fund, the endless arguments, the confrontation with my entire family. It had all led here, to balance, to recognition, to respect. I realized then that justice doesn't always arrive in a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it comes slowly, like rain carving new paths into stone. Sometimes it begins with one person refusing to stay silent any longer. And that was me. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been punished for your strength? Have you ever been told you don't need support, only to watch someone else be rewarded for their weakness? If you have, I want you to know this. Your worth is not defined by their neglect. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. And when you stand up for yourself, you give others permission to do the same. For me, the trust fund wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting the story of who I was in this family. No longer the invisible provider, no longer the silent workhorse. I was someone who demanded fairness and finally received it. So here I am telling you my story, not just to share the pain, but to share the power that came after. Because if you've ever been in my place, you know that the moment you stop allowing others to define you, everything changes. And if this story spoke to you, if it made you reflect on your own life, then don't let it end here. Subscribe, join this community, and stay with me, because the next video will take you even deeper into stories of family betrayal, resilience, and justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The rain eased outside, leaving the night quiet calm. For the first time, I felt the same calm within me, 'cause finally I had won. Looking back now, I realize the fight was never really about money. It was about dignity, about being seen. For years, I believed that love meant sacrifice, that if I just gave enough, eventually my parents would value me the way they valued Megan. But life has a way of teaching us lessons the hard way. When I stopped paying, when I refused to carry the weight anymore, I thought I would lose everything. I thought I would be cast out of the family completely. Instead, I gained something I didn't expect: clarity. Clarity that love is not measured in dollars. That independence does not mean isolation. That strength should never be punished. The binder of receipts still sits in my desk drawer, but I don't look at it with anger anymore. I see it as a reminder of how far I've come. Every page is a chapter in a story I once believed was about obligation, but is really about freedom. Megan and I are not suddenly perfect sisters. Trust takes time and wounds take longer to heal than papers to sign. But her choice to stand with me, to split the trust, to acknowledge the truth, it mattered. It showed me that even in the most tangled families, change is possible. My parents may never apologize, and maybe I don't need them to, because what I needed all along wasn't their money or their praise. What I needed was to find my own voice, and now I have it. So I'll leave you with this. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been told you're too strong to need help, remember your strength is not their excuse, it is your gift. And one day when you use it to draw your own boundaries, you'll discover what I did. That freedom is worth everything.